Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're not debating a particular subject, but we're going to dissect the logic of a debate itself. We're going to strip away all the emotion, all the rhetoric, and see how an argument is won on pure, cold logic.
So let's set the stage. Imagine a formal, high-stakes debate on a really deep topic. On one side, we'll just call him Jake, and on the other, we'll call them Logic. They represent two very different positions, and our job today is to act as the referee, but only for the logic.
So that brings us to the big question, right? When you take away the powerful speeches, the charisma, all the persuasive tricks, what's actually left? How do you score a fight that's supposed to be about pure logic and nothing else?
Well, it actually boils down to something pretty simple. The winner is the one who leaves their opponent's biggest questions just hanging in the air, unanswered. And in this case study, based on that standard alone, Jake won. So let's dive in and see exactly how he pulled it off.
Okay, so Jake's first move was a brilliant one. He didn't just ask a question. He posed a very specific, very tricky challenge. We're going to call it the counting problem. And really, it was a carefully constructed logical trap.
So here it is, Jake's first dilemma. And it's a direct challenge to the rules of math we use every single day. Look, if you have three distinct things, x, y, and z, and you call each of them a god, our normal logic says that adds up to three gods. Jake is basically asking, show me the logical reason why, in this one specific case, 1 plus 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 3.
Now, to really get the power of this question, we need to know one little piece of jargon, the word sortal. A sortal is just a fancy word for the label that tells you what kind of thing you're counting, right? If the sortal is chair, you count the chairs. If it's human, you count the humans. It sets the rules for the game.
And this right here lays it out perfectly. On the left, that's just how we count things. It's intuitive. On the right, you see the logical puzzle Jake created. To get out of this trap, the logic side needed to provide a brand new, special counting rule for the sortal, God, and explain why it's different. But they never did. The question was just left hanging.
All right, so that was dilemma number one. But Jake wasn't done. He followed it up with a second unanswered challenge that built right on top of the first one. Let's call this one the will problem.
So Jake's argument here was, okay, if one being exists because of the will of another being, doesn't that create a huge contradiction if you also claim they share the exact same single will? I mean, how can a will be both the cause of something and also the will of the thing it caused? It's a real paradox.
And this is a classic debate tactic, right? He's backing his opponent into a logical corner. They're left with two bad options. Either they have to admit, okay, maybe the wills aren't exactly the same, which undermines a key part of their argument, or they have to accept a kind of dependency that really challenges the idea that they're co-equal. The logic side had to solve this, and again, they didn't. So, just to recap, Jake has put two very precise, very tough logical dilemmas on the table. Now, his opponent, Logic, did try to respond, so let's take a look at those responses and see why they just didn't connect, why they failed to solve the problems Jake had raised.
The first big defense from the logic side was this statement here. The idea is, because they all share one divine essence, it just follows that they have to share one will. And, on the surface, that sounds pretty reasonable.
But here's the flaw, and it's a subtle one. This answer doesn't actually solve the problem of dependence that Jake brought up. It's what's known as begging the question. It's like saying it's true because it's true. It just restates the conclusion. It never explains how one thing can come from a will and still share that very same will without any contradiction. The problem is still there.
Next up, the logic side brought up a classic doctrine, something called inseparable operations. And all this really means is that when they act externally, in the world, they always act together as one. It's a single unified action.
But this is a mistake you see in debates all the time. The statement itself is a standard belief. It's totally orthodox. But it was never actually applied to solve the two specific problems Jake raised, the counting problem or the will problem. It was just sort of thrown out there. And naming a doctrine isn't the same thing as making a logical argument.
And this table here, it really tells the whole story. On the left, you've got Jake's two specific logical challenges that he put on the table, and on the right, you see the corresponding gaps, the missing pieces in the defense from logic. For each specific burden Jake created, a specific answer was needed, and in both cases, it was missing.
And that right there is the key takeaway for how these kinds of contests are judged. It's a fundamental rule of formal debate. If your opponent puts a specific, relevant burden of proof on you and you don't resolve it, you lose the round on logic. It really is that simple.